Good evening. Welcome to your first flipped classroom. Today we're going to talk about solving equations using multiplication and division. So today in class we learned about how to do it with addition and subtraction. The rules are still going to be the same. So take a minute and go ahead and write this down into your notes. The first thing you have to do always is identify what the variable is, or the letter, and then you're going to move the number that's keeping the variable from being alone with an inverse operation. If you remember, inverse means opposite, so those inverse operations are operations that undo each other. Addition, the opposite of addition is subtraction, so that can undo it. Multiplication, the opposite of that would be division. Just remember, the rule is what you do to one side, you must do to the other, and the last and final thing is equations have only one solution to the variable that will make it true. So let's go ahead and get here started on number one. It asks us to solve the equation. The first thing you want to do is identify the variable, which we see is x. Now there's something that is not allowing the x to be alone, and that is the divide by 3. So the opposite of divide by 3 would be to multiply by 3. What I do to the left side, I have to be fair and also do it to the right side. So now this will cancel out. I'm going to bring down my x equals, and negative 6 times 3 equals negative 18. So that's your answer, but it also tells us that it wants us to check our solution. So now all you're going to do is you're going to take what we had for our original problem, drop down the equal sign just so everything looks nice and neat and you can keep your work organized. We're going to drop down the original problem said x divided by 3 equals negative 6. Now I know what x is. What is x? It's negative 18. So I'm going to go ahead and erase that right there, and I'm going to plug in my negative 18 instead. Now you can see negative 18 divided by 3 equals negative 6. I'll drop it down. Drop down your equal sign, and then we're just going to drop this negative 6 down, and that's true. Negative 6 does equal negative 6, so it checked out. Let's go on to problem B. It looks very similar. Once again, identify the variable, which is x. We want to see what is not allowing x to be alone, and that would be divide by 5. So the opposite of divide by 5 is multiply by 5. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I'm going to once again take my x, and this will be dropped down, and I get x equals, and 2 times 5 is 10. So that's my solution. Once again, it asks me to check it. So I'm going to rewrite. Let's drop down the equal sign. Rewrite this original problem that I had up there before I started writing a bunch of stuff, which said x divided by 5 equals 2. Now remember, I know what the x is, so I'm going to get rid of that, and we're going to go ahead and put in a 10 instead to replace the x. Working underneath, drop down your equal sign directly underneath it. 10 divided by 5 equals 2, and 2 does equal 2, so it did check out. Going on to problem C. Here I have negative y equals negative 24. Now you might think the variable is already alone. However, it's not. Notice there is a negative sign there. I cannot have it be a negative y. I need it just to be a positive y. So technically, I could stick a little 1 right here because sometimes it helps us to understand. That means it's being multiplied by negative 1. Now, in order to get rid of negative 1 when you're multiplying it, the opposite would be to divide by negative 1. What I do to one side, I've got to do to the other. So here, these two negative 1 over negative 1 equals plain old 1, so I can just drop down my y equals, and negative 24 divided by negative 1, that's two negatives. I'm going to get a positive answer of 24. Now we're going to check our solution. Remember the original problem, drop down your equal sign directly underneath, rewrite negative y equals negative 24. Now, I know what y is. We just discovered up here that y is 24. So I'm going to erase that y right there, and instead I'm going to plug in my answer, 24. And sure enough, negative 24 does equal negative 24. So I'm going to give myself a mini check mark because it does check out. Problem D. Now you can see the variable is on the right side. We're still going to do the rules exactly the same. First things first, identify the variable, which is an x. What is not allowing x to be alone? Multiply by negative 4.5. Be careful not to think that that means subtract, because a lot of times people are going to try to do plus 4.5. But that is not what the operation is. Remember, whenever you have a number directly next to a letter, that means to multiply. So in order to get rid of multiply by negative 4.5, I have to divide by negative 4.5. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. Now this is a thing that you're probably going to want to use your calculator. You could work it out on the side if you want to, or you can use your calculator. So on the right-hand side, negative 4.5 divided by negative 4.5 cancels out because that just equals 1. So I'm going to drop down my x on the right-hand side. Now go ahead and put this into your calculator. 18 divided by negative 4.5, and the correct answer is negative 4. If you want to, you can rewrite so that your variable is first, but you don't have to do that. And now we're going to go ahead and check our solution. So let's take that right there, drop down your equal sign. 18 equals negative 4.5 times x. Now I know what the x is, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that x, and instead I'm going to multiply it by what we already know x is. I'm going to multiply it times a negative 4. Okay, so now you can see, drop down your 18 equals, and then I want you to go ahead and put this into your calculators. Negative 4.5 times negative 4, and when you do that, you will see that your answer is 18. So it does check out. 18 equals 18. Give yourself a mini check mark. Now there's a new rule that I want to teach to you, and this has to do with whenever there's a fraction there. I want you to pull out your red pen and put this into your notes. If the number you need to move is a fraction, multiply by the reciprocal. Now remember, a reciprocal is a flipped fraction. So same rules still apply. Identify the variable, which is an x, and what is not allowing the x to be alone. This 4/5 right here, multiplied by 4/5, isn't letting it be alone. But remember, the rule is, in order to get rid of a fraction, you just multiply it by the reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 4/5 is 5/4. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply both sides by 5/4. As you do that, this right here will cancel out, and you're just left with an x on the left-hand side. So I'm going to drop down my x and drop down my equals. Over here on the right-hand side, we can cross-reduce. That becomes a 1 and a negative 2. So now we've got negative 2 times 5, which equals negative 10. So this right here is my answer, but remember, we've got to check to see if that's correct or not. So drop down the equal sign and rewrite your original problem. 4/5 times x equals negative 8. Now we know that x equals negative 10. So instead of that x right there, I'm going to go ahead and put a negative 10. I want you to be careful though. Don't just stick minus 10 there. I was multiplying times an x, which means I need to multiply times negative 10. Now once again, you can cross-reduce. This becomes a 1, and that will be a negative 2. And on the left-hand side, start with your numerator. We've got 4 times negative 2, which equals negative 8. And negative 8 does equal negative 8. So give yourself a mini check mark. That did check out. If I'm going too fast, you can go ahead and pause the video, slow, and then re-listen to what it is that I've said. Let's go on to the next one. I want you to pause the video and try to do problem F on your own. Okay, let's see what we got. We want to get rid of this 3/2, and we're multiplying there, so I'm going to go ahead and multiply now instead by the reciprocal, which would be 2/3. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So now you can see on the left-hand side, these two cancel out, and you're left with plain old y. So I'm going to drop down the y and drop down my equal sign. On the right-hand side, once again, we're going to go ahead and cross-reduce. This becomes a 1 and a negative 2. Now just go ahead and do the numerators first because it's going to be over a 1. Negative 2 times 2 is negative 4 over 1, but we don't need the over 1 part, so we'll just go ahead and say y equals negative 4. Once again, bring down the original problem. 3/2 y equals negative 6. Now that I know what y is, I'm going to go ahead and take it and replace this where the y is at. This means to multiply, so we're going to go ahead and erase this and multiply by what my y is, which is negative 4. And once again, you can put it over 1 if that helps you. This becomes a 1, and that becomes a negative 2. Multiplying across, 3 times negative 2 equals negative 6. Drop down your equal sign, negative 6. Give yourself a mini check mark. Now notice this. All of my equal signs are lined up. Check to see if yours are in your notes. If they're not, you need to erase it and fix it, because if you have sloppy work, it makes it a lot harder to try to keep your work organized. Moving on to the next one, problem G. Once again, I've got a fraction here I'm trying to get rid of, but I also want to get rid of that negative sign. So the opposite of negative 8/5 is going to be, I'll just do it right here on top, negative 5/8. That means I also have to multiply by negative 5/8. If you want to, you could put that over a 1. So now we see on the left-hand side, this is going to cancel each other out, and I'm just left with a b equals. Now if you look, there is nothing that can cross-reduce here. So I'm going to multiply my numerators. 5 times negative 5 is negative 25, and 1 times 8 is 8. I'm going to let you go ahead and leave it there as an improper fraction because that's just going to help us as we plug it back into our original problem. So drop those equal signs down, and originally it said negative 8/5 times b. Now we know what b is, so instead I'm not going to put that b, I'm going to go ahead and put negative 25/8 equals 5. Now there's going to be some things I can cross-reduce. These both become a 1, and this becomes a 1 and a 5. Now you can see I'm multiplying a negative times a negative. My answer has to be a positive, so 1 times 5 is 5, equals, and then I'm just going to drop down that 5 right there, and that does equal each other, so give yourself a mini check mark. Another example right here with a fraction, multiplying by 3/8, I want to get rid of it, so we are going to multiply by the reciprocal, which is 8/3. What you do to one side, you've got to do to the other. Now you can cross-reduce some things here, so this cancels out, and I'm left with h on the left-hand side equals, and here I've got, this can turn into a 1 and into a 3. Negative 3 times 8 equals negative 24. Once again, remember, please check your solution, drop down your equal sign. I've got 3/8 times h, but I know h is negative 24, so I'm going to go ahead and do negative 24. You can put it over a 1 if you want, equals negative 9. So now let's go ahead and cross-reduce. This becomes a 1, negative 3. When you multiply your numerators, you get 3 times negative 3 equals negative 9, and negative 9 does equal negative 9. Give yourself a mini check mark. All right, so those are kind of the examples of how we try to solve the equation. Let's do a modeling real life. In this story problem, the temperature at midnight is shown at the left, so you can see it over here. It's at 56 degrees Fahrenheit. Right there, you can see that. The temperature decreases by 4.5 degrees each hour. So key word here, we know that decreases is going to mean subtract, or it means to minus. And then there's another key word here that says each hour. Anytime you see that word each, that means to multiply. So it's asking us, when will the temperature be 29 degrees Fahrenheit? So let's go ahead and start at what the temperature is at midnight. We can see it is 56 degrees. Now we can see once again some clue words. It says that it is decreasing, so we know that is going to be subtract. It decreases by 4.5 degrees each hour. So I'm going to use h as an hour, but once again, because we have the word each here, we know that means to multiply. So this right here is telling us to multiply 4.5 degrees times h for each hour. Now, we know what we want our answer to be. We're wondering when it's going to be 29 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is going to be what we want it to equal, 29 degrees Fahrenheit. So now we're going to work it just like normal. Our whole goal is to get this variable right here by itself. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and get rid of this 56 over here by subtracting 56 from both sides. When you do that, this cancels out. The negative 4.5 degrees per hour drops down. And then we've got to subtract this, put the bigger number on top, and subtract the smaller number. When you do that, you get negative 27. Now you still want your h to be by itself, so I've got to get rid of this multiply by negative 4.5. The way that I do that is to divide by negative 4.5 on both sides. You're going to need your calculator again for this, but you can see h equals negative 27 divided by negative 4.5 is 6. So the question asked us, when will the temperature be 29 degrees? 6 hours later is the correct answer. And just go ahead and box in your answer. The last thing we're going to look at tonight is this is asking us to describe the inverse operation that will undo the given operation. So what's the opposite of subtracting 12? Adding 12. Look at the next one. What is the opposite of multiplying by 9? Dividing by 9. What's the opposite of adding 6? Subtracting 6. And then finally, the opposite of subtracting 10 would be adding 10. I want you to go ahead and try to do the think, pair, share. Actually, just kidding. You don't have to do the think, pair, share. We'll do it tomorrow in class. Good job watching the video. Have a good night.